She was 18 years old, counting $23 in a freezing truck. That number 23 was all that stood between her and nothing. She had run the engine in short bursts to stay warm, watching the fuel needle drop each time, doing the math on how many more nights she had. And now the math was done. She sat with both hands on the wheel, breath fogging the glass, and for the first time since she had been put out of her home, she let herself cry. Not from the cold, not from hunger, from the thought that maybe no one on earth was keeping track of whether she lived or died. How does a homeless 19-year-old end up owning property in the New Mexico desert? That story starts on a hot May morning in Amarillo, Texas, with a suitcase already packed and set by the front door. Della Mercer came downstairs that morning and found it waiting for her, a note in her mother's shaky handwriting. "Della, you're grown now. Ray and I need our own space." Beside the note, an envelope with $100 inside. No goodbye, no explanation, just a door that would not open for her again. She read the note twice. Then she picked up the suitcase, her grandfather's canvas tool bag, and walked out. She did not look back. What she had: a 1994 Ford Ranger with 211,000 miles on it, a folding knife her grandfather had given her when she was 12, and $100. The year that followed was a long one. She slept in the truck. She changed oil at tire shops, mopped floors at a late-night diner, fixed window units for cash. She learned which truck stops let you shower without being run off, which churches gave breakfast on Sundays, where to park under a light so no one bothered you. She got thinner. Her hands got harder. She never once called home. But that January night in the Lubbock grocery store parking lot that was the bottom, $23, half a tank of gas, no one keeping track. She took out her grandfather's knife, opened it, closed it. That small, solid click, the only sound left in her life that meant safe. Open, close, open, close, until her breathing leveled out. Then she wiped her face, pulled her coat up to her chin, and slept. The next morning she found an oil change place that paid cash, worked 3 shifts, and by night she had $40 more. She never cried again after that night. She just kept going. It was the only thing she knew how to do. Subscribe before we get to the part where a girl with nothing left bids $10 on a gas station in a town of 11 people. The strangest part of all of this is what she found inside. And it wasn't money. Late summer, a small town public library. Della sits at a free computer, the air conditioning humming low, her hands resting on a keyboard she has no reason to use. She's just passing time, waiting for nothing. Then she sees a list of properties on the Guadalupe County, New Mexico website. Properties being sold to settle unpaid taxes, empty lots, broken down trailers, and at the bottom, something that makes her stop breathing for a second. An old gas station and repair garage at the junction of Highway 104, and a dirt road near a place called Comanche Wells. Vacant since 2005, minimum bid $10. Below the price, a single line in italics. Buyer assumes any and all environmental remediation obligations related to underground fuel storage tanks. She stares at the screen. A gas station, a garage, and suddenly, she's not in the library anymore. She's 8 years old, sitting on a 3-legged stool in her grandfather's garage, watching him take an engine apart boat by boat. The smell of old motor oil and rubber and warm metal under sun. The way he taught her to listen to a running engine and know where it hurt. To torque a bolt to the right tightness and then stop, never overdo it. That everything that breaks, for a reason. And if you are patient enough, you will find it. The year she turned 12, Hollis Mercer handed her a case folding knife with a bone handle, worn smooth from 40 years in his pocket, the letter H stamped into the side. "You hold on to that," he said. "A good tool finds the hand that needs it." She didn't fully understand him then, but she kept that knife from that day on. Hollis died of a heart attack when she was 15. They found him next to a '78 Chevrolet he'd been fixing for a neighbor for free. The garage closed up. Her grandmother had passed years before, and Della's world, which had only ever been truly warm inside the oil smell of that garage, went cold. Her mother started seeing a man named Ray. Ray moved in when Della was 16. Tense dinners. Remarks about her being underfoot. Ray drinking. Her mother staring at her plate. Della withdrew into quiet, took an after-school job at a car wash, and counted the days until she was 18. She didn't have to count as long as she thought. Now she's sitting in a library, staring at a screen, with $187.40 in her pocket, half a tank of gas in her grandfather's truck, and the folding knife he gave her. She closes the laptop, walks out to the truck, and drives west toward New Mexico. She doesn't know if an abandoned gas station counts as a tool, but it's the first thing in a year that pulls her toward a direction instead of just letting her drift. A good tool finds the hand that needs it. She's about to find out if that's true. The drive took almost 5 hours. Della kept the windows down the whole way, the hot wind pulling through the cab, carrying a smell she had never known in Texas, dust and juniper resin. Something dry and clean that made her feel like she was leaving more than just Amarillo behind. She turned off the interstate onto Old Highway 104. The road narrowed, the asphalt cracked. For 30 miles, the only things she passed were a hawk sitting on a fence post and the rusted carcass of a pickup lying in a ditch. Nothing moved. Nothing made a sound, except her own engine. Then Comanche Wells appeared in the late afternoon light, like something the desert had forgotten mid-sentence. A row of adobe buildings, half collapsed. A small church with a locked door and a peeling sign. A post office no bigger than a closet. A rusted marker that read, Population 11. And at the crossroads, where the highway met a dirt road running off toward distant ranches, stood the station. Della shut off the engine and sat for a long while, just looking. It was smaller than she had pictured, but sturdier too. A cinder block building with a shed roof and a concrete canopy reaching out over 2 old pumps. The white paint had gone yellow and was flaking off, showing the gray block underneath. The pumps themselves were rusted, their glass faces broken, but they stood straight, like they were still waiting for someone to pull up and fill a tank. She got out. Gravel ground under her boots. The wind came through the canopy with a long, low moan that seemed to come from somewhere deep in the building itself. And when she looked up at the front wall, above the door to the repair bay, she saw a line of hand-painted letters, mostly faded. The red had bleached to a pale coral, but she could still make it out. No one gets left on the side of the road. Della stood there in the honey-colored light and read it over and over. She did not understand why an abandoned gas station in the middle of nowhere would carry a line like that, but she felt as though it had been written for her. For the first time in a year, something felt like it belonged to her. The Guadalupe County office sat in Santa Rosa, 40 miles from Comanche Wells. Della walked in the next morning with her printed notice and her $187. The woman behind the property desk was around 60. Gray hair pinned up, a silver Navajo necklace at her throat, and a voice slow enough that you understood she was in no hurry to be anywhere. Her name was Pearl Quintana. She had worked that office for 26 years. Pearl looked at the notice. She looked at Della. She looked at the notice again. Old Truett Place, she said. It was not a question. Asa Truett. As of 2011, no wife, no kids, just a nephew who couldn't be bothered to come to the funeral. Taxes went unpaid, the state foreclosed. The redemption time ran out 3 years back, and it's been up for auction season after season with nobody bidding. Folks are scared of those fuel tanks underground. Cleaning them out can run $100,000. She paused, studying Della. Where did you come from, honey? Texas. Amarillo. And how old are you? 19. Pearl set the notice down. What's? As he looked at Della for a long moment, the look of a woman who had sat behind that desk for 26 years and seen every kind of person walk through. 26 years I've worked here, she said slowly, and I never had a 19-year-old drive in from Texas to buy a $10 gas station. The people who ask about these are land speculators or retirees looking for somewhere to dry out. She paused again. "You sure, honey? I have to ask. It's hard country. Nobody lives within miles. You'd have to run power back out, drill a well, or test the old one. And those tanks are a real burden." "I'm sure," Della said. "I don't have anywhere else to go." Pearl looked at her a moment more. Then she did something Della would remember for the rest of her life. She opened her own purse, took out a $10 bill, and laid it on the counter beside the paperwork. "I'll cover the bid. You keep your money for food." She began filling out the form. The recording and transfer fee came to $43.12. That part Della paid, counting it out a bill at a time. "Welcome to Guadalupe County, Miss." "Mercer," Pearl said, and she slid an old ring of keys across the counter, tied with a slip of paper that read Truett Station. On the drive back to Comanche Wells, Della counted her money. $144.28. A ring of keys, a knife, and a gas station in the middle of the desert that was now, legally, hers. She could not go inside that first night. It was nearly dark, and she wanted to see everything clearly. She slept in the truck in the dirt lot out front. Doors locked. Knife open in the cup holder, the line on the wall above her fading into the dark like a promise she did not yet understand had been made. By whom? To whom? The next morning, Della opened the repair bay with one of the old keys. The rolling steel door shrieked up in a long, dusty groan, then stuck halfway. She had to use both hands to force it the rest of the way. Sunlight poured into the bay, and dust rose into the air in floating bands of light. She stood in the doorway and let her eyes adjust, let her nose adjust. The smell of a place shut up for 20 years. Old motor oil, dust and cement. A faint sour smell of rusted metal. And underneath all of it, something that made her chest tighten. Exactly the smell of her grandfather's garage in Amarillo. The repair bay was a wide room with a concrete floor. A service pit ran down the middle. Against the back wall, a long workbench. On the bench, a whole row of tools still hung on a rack under dust thick as felt. A vise was clamped to the bench, its jaws gone to rust. Tires were stacked in one corner, the rubber cracked and bleached. There was a calendar on the wall from a motor oil company, open to April of 2005. A photo of a desert road at dusk. 20 years ago, someone had turned the page to April, and then never turned it again. Behind the bay was a small office. Della went in. There was a wooden desk, a swivel chair, in the corner, a small old combination floor safe, locked, and a wall covered with things tacked up. She went close and looked. Photographs, dozens of them, gone yellow. People standing beside their cars in front of the station. A family by a station wagon. A young soldier in uniform beside a bicycle. An old woman by a Buick. And in nearly every photo, standing at the edge of the frame, was the same man. Tall, lean, an oil-stained cap on his head, two big hands and eyes crinkled from smiling. Under one photo in pencil, someone had written, "Asa and the Bagais fixed their water pump. 1,987. Della spent her first 3 days just cleaning. She had no money to hire anyone, so she did it all by hand. She swept 20 years of dust off the concrete. She wiped down every tool on the rack, and was surprised to find them sound. Good steel from a time when men made tools to last a lifetime. She pumped the old well behind the building, and was glad to find it still worked. The water came cloudy at first, then clearing. Every night, she slept in the truck. Every morning, she went back in. Slowly, the place began to look like somewhere a person could live. On the 4th day, she decided to open the safe. It sat on the floor in the corner of the office, a combination dial type. But she had no combination. She had meant to call a locksmith, but she had no money for one. So instead, she did the thing she was best at. She listened. She knelt in front of the safe, pressed her ear against the face of it, and turned the dial very slowly, listening for the faint clicks of the wheels inside, the same way she had once listened to an engine and known where it hurt. It took the better part of an hour, but at last she found 3 numbers, and the door swung open with a heavy thunk. The safe swung open with a heavy thunk. No gold inside. Della hadn't expected gold, but 3 things sat there that made her sink down onto the cold cement floor. The first was a ledger, thick, bound in worn leather, so heavy she had to lift it with both hands. The second was a cedar cigar box, the wood still faintly sweet when she picked it up, lighter than she expected. The third was a yellowed paper envelope, thick, sealed, across the front, in the large, sure hand of a man more used to a wrench than a pen, a single line, for whoever keeps her running. She opened the cigar box first. Inside, rolled carefully in waxed paper, was money. Old bills folded and bound with rotted rubber bands. A plastic tube of silver dollars, heavy and cold in her palm. A small stack of United States savings bonds, printed in years long past. She didn't know what all of it was worth, but she knew it was enough. The whole savings of a man who had lived alone, but that wasn't what made her cry. What made her cry was the ledger. She opened it. The first pages were the ordinary books of a gas station. Dates, names, amounts. $2 of gas, $1.50 for a tire, $5 for spark plugs. The handwriting was firm and even, running through year after year, decade after decade, from the late 1950s to the early 2000s. The history of a road, written in small numbers. Then she turned to the back. A separate section, written by hand, under a heading underlined twice. A long list, a date, a sum of money. And beside each sum, instead of a mark for paid, a single word repeated hundreds of times across the years: forgive. The Sandoval transmission, $320. Forgive. They lost a cow that winter. The Lujan boy filled his tank to get him to El Paso to enlist. $18. Forgive. God keep him. Widow mares, the Buick brakes, tires, battery, $211. Forgive. She drives it to church. Can't have her walking. The Begay family, water pump out in the dry heat. Forgive. No one gets left on the side of the road. The list went on, page after page. Hundreds of names, hundreds of times the word forgive. Della sat on the cold cement floor of a gas station in the middle of the desert, and she read 47 years of one man's quiet kindness. A man she had never met. A man who had died before she was grown. A man who had spent his whole life at this crossroads, making sure no one ever had to walk home. She read slowly, line by line, as if reading slowly enough might let her hear the voice of the one who had written it. Some lines were just a name and a number, and the word forgive. But some lines Asa had written a few words after, and it was those lines that closed her throat. The Romero boy fixed his car so he could get his mother to the hospital in Albuquerque. Forgive. She didn't make it. I'm still glad he got there in time to say goodbye. There was one line she read over and over. The number in it startled her. Widow Mares, the Buick, $211. Forgive. 211, the same as the number on the odometer of the truck her grandfather had left her. She knew it was only a coincidence, but sitting there with one dead man's truck and another dead man's ledger, Della felt as if the small numbers were trying to tell her something she did not yet have the words to name. Then she opened the envelope. Inside were several things. A metal dog tag, thin and cold, stamped Asa J. Truitt, and a string of numbers. A silver St. Christopher medal, the patron saint of travelers worn smooth on its face from being rubbed too many times, and a letter, handwritten, 3 pages, dated February of 2009, 2 years before Asa died. Della read it in the light coming through the dusty office window. The letter began like this: To whoever is reading this, I don't know who you are. I'm probably dead by the time you find it. I'm writing it because I have no children to tell these things to, and I figure a place has a right to know its own story. My name is Asa Truitt. I was born in 1934, dirt poor, on a ranch not far from here. The winter I was 15, in 1949, my father drove our old truck full of family across this highway in a snowstorm, and it died on us in the middle of the night in cold that can kill a man. We sat in that freezing cab for hours. I remember my mother started to pray. Then a pair of headlights came up through the snow. A mechanic stopped. He didn't know us. He lay down under our truck in the snow and fixed the frozen fuel pump with his bare hands. Took the better part of an hour. When he was done, my father tried to press the last few coins in his pocket on the man. The mechanic pushed his hand away. He said something I never forgot. He said, "No one gets left on the side of the road." Then he got in his truck and drove off. I never learned his name. I went to Korea in 1952. I saw things I won't write here. When I came home, I didn't have much left to believe in, but I still remembered the mechanic in the snowstorm. So in 1958, I scraped together what I had, bought this crossroads, and opened the station. I told myself I'd do the thing that man did for me, over and over until I couldn't do it anymore. I painted that line on the wall so I'd see it every morning. I'll be honest with you, I was never rich. There were years I made almost nothing, but I kept it open. I forgave more debts than I ever collected. You'll see that in the ledger. I don't regret a single one. The money in the cedar box is everything I managed to put away for myself. It isn't much, but it's real. I leave it to you, the one who comes after, along with the station. I ask only one thing, and this is not a legal condition, just the request of a dying man. Keep her running. Keep that line on the wall from fading. When someone comes through here stuck, out of money, scared, remember that once a man stopped for me in a snowstorm, and that debt was never paid off. It was only passed on. Della read the letter twice. Then she folded it back up, very carefully, set it on the desk, and sat for a long while in the dusty office. One hand around her grandfather's folding knife. One hand around the St. Christopher medal of a man she had never met. Two things from two men, both gone. Both of whom had loved her in their own way, even though one had never known she existed. A good tool finds the hand that needs it, Hollis had once said. Della was beginning to understand what he meant. Subscribe, because what she does next, with that letter, and that ledger, and that line on the wall, is the part of this story that answers the only question that really matters. What do you do when someone hands you a debt that was never meant to be paid off, only passed on? She took the ledger, the letter, and the cigar box to a lawyer in Santa Rosa. A woman named Marion Cobb, around 50, plain-spoken, the kind who handled rural property and didn't waste words. Cobb went through everything. She had the money, appraised the old bills with a collector, the bonds and silver cashed out. It came to about $9,200. Not a fortune, but to Della, who had $144 to her name, it felt like being handed a future. She didn't spend it on herself. She spent it on the station. The first to come help was an old man named Manny Ortega, retired mechanic and welder, lived on the edge of Santa Rosa, knew Asa Truitt for 30 years. He drove out one morning, walked the whole building, ran his hand over the cinder block, looked up at the tin roof. Then he said something Della would always remember. Bones are good on this one. Good block. Roof needs doing, but the bones are sound. He charged a fair rate, agreed to teach her some of the work. They did the roof first. Stripped the rusted tin, reinforced the wood trusses, laid new sheeting they bought cheap from a salvage yard in Tucumcari. Della learned to set rivets, to chalk a line, to work up high in the dry desert wind that never quite stopped. Her hands blistered, then hardened. Her skin went brown. Every night she ached. But every night she also felt something she had not felt in years. Something close to joy. One night, in late October, a windstorm came up out of the west. Blew all night, with a long shriek like a freight train. In the morning, Della walked out to find 3 sheets of tin they had laid the week before torn loose and thrown against the fence. A week of work crumpled in the dust. She stood looking at it a long time, and for a moment, The old feeling from the nights in the truck rose up in her. The feeling that no matter how hard she tried, the world would tear it back out of her hands. Then she heard Manny's truck on the gravel. The old man got out, looked at the tin, took off his cap, scratched his head. So we do it again. This time we put in the storm screws. They did it again. Took 3 days. No wind ever tore it loose after that. Manny taught her more than how to roof. He taught her to read an old cinder block wall to know which block was still solid and which had gone soft, to mix mortar by hand, to tool a joint so the rain ran out instead of soaking in. He taught her to weld, sitting behind her with his hand over her hand to keep the bead even, just the way her grandfather had with that wrench when she was 12. One afternoon, resting in the shade with their backs against the sun-warmed wall, Manny told her that Asa himself had taught him to weld more than 30 years before, right here in this very garage. Never charged him a dime. Old Asa told me, Manny said, eyes out on the desert. Manny, this trade isn't to keep for yourself. You learn it. You teach it to the next one. So now, I'm teaching it to you. You see that? It just keeps going. Della saw it. For the first time, she began to understand that she was not just fixing a station. She was stepping into a current that had been running long before she ever arrived. She repainted the line on the wall, climbed a ladder with a brush and a can of red paint, and traced over every letter, following the faded strokes. No one gets left on the side of the road. When she finished, she walked back out to the road and looked. The red letters stood out bright against the gray block under a sky that desert blue, and Della felt as though she had brought something back to life that had been dead. The station was running again. The line was bright, but she had no idea that a black truck was already turning off the interstate, and the man inside carried the Truett name, and he was not coming to buy gas. Winter passed, and spring came to Comanche Wells. Then came the news that made the whole county talk. The New Mexico Department of Transportation announced a project to realign Highway 104, build a new interchange. A private company proposed a truck travel plaza right there. The map printed in the Santa Rosa paper showed the new interchange sitting right at the Comanche Wells crossroads, right on the station's lot. A piece of land nobody would have paid more than $10 for a month earlier had suddenly become the most valuable corner in 50 miles. The black truck came one April morning, a high-end SUV, spotless, nearly impossible on those roads. 2 men got out. The younger one wore a tucked-in shirt and designer sunglasses, that restless look of a man always thinking about the next thing. The older one wore a suit, despite the heat, carrying a leather case. He walked around the station like a man pricing every square foot into money. You, the one who bought this place? The younger one asked, skipping the greeting. I'm Lyle Truett. Asa Truett was my father's uncle. This place should have been family. He jerked his chin at the man in the suit. This is Garrett Vance. He represents the developer. We're here to fix a mistake. Vance opened the case, drew out a stack of papers, smiled the smile people use when they've already decided they'll win. Miss Mercer, is it? Let me be direct. The tax auction you bought into had a defect in notice. My client here is the rightful heir, and he never received proper notice of the foreclosure. That makes your deed vulnerable to being voided. We can take this to court very expensive, very slow for someone in your position. Or you can accept an offer. $5,000 to drop any claim and leave this month. $5,000 for a place you bought for 10. That's a return of 500 to 1. Della looked at them a long moment. Looked at Lyle Truett, who carried the Truett name but never came to his own uncle's funeral. Looked at Vance, who saw this place and saw only square footage. Then she did the thing she learned from her grandfather and from a dead man named Asa. She did not argue. She did not raise her voice. I'll think about your offer, but before I decide, you ought to know one thing. Your uncle left a letter. I think you should read it. She didn't hand them the letter, only said it existed. Something flickered across Lyle Truett's face, a flash of unease. Vance's mouth tightened just slightly. He'd been at this long enough to know that the soft words of a person who is not afraid are more dangerous than any shouting. You've got 2 weeks, Vance said, snapping the case shut. "Then we file." The two men got in the truck and drove off, leaving a cloud of yellow dust hanging in the dry air. Della watched the dust settle. Then she went into the office, picked up the phone, and called Marion Cobb. So, Della called Marion Cobb. And Marion Cobb, the lawyer in Santa Rosa who had helped her with Ace's money, did not sound worried. Not even a little. "You stay calm," she said. "This isn't the first time I've seen this play. Soon as a piece of land gets valuable, some relative crawls out, claiming they never got notice. Sometimes that's true. Mostly it isn't. Let me pull the file." She spent a week in the Guadalupe County Records office, went through every page of the foreclosure on the station, found the certified mail receipts the state had sent notice of the tax delinquency and the pending sale to Lyle Truitt's last known address, 3 separate times across 3 years. 2 of the 3 carried his signature on the return card. Then she found the published notices. The sale had been advertised in the county paper for 4 straight weeks, exactly as the law required, 3 years before Della ever arrived. And she found the record showing the statutory redemption period of 3 years. It passed with no one stepping up to pay the back taxes. Cobb called Della. "Your deed is solid as bedrock. They've got no case. They're just betting you're a 19-year-old girl with no money who gets scared for $5,000. They bet wrong. But Cobb did one thing more. She looked into the problem everyone feared, those underground tanks. And she found that the state of New Mexico runs a cleanup fund for exactly this kind of old, abandoned rural fuel station, a program almost no one knows about. A piece of land people thought carried a $100,000 burden could be cleaned up at almost no cost through that fund if the owner filed the paperwork the right way. Cobb helped Della file. The last meeting happened at the station itself. Lyle Truitt and Garrett Vance came back, this time with their own lawyer. Marion Cobb sat across from them with a case full of records. Della stood leaning against the workbench, arms folded, silent. Cobb didn't raise her voice. She simply opened the case and laid each document down on the bench, slowly, the way a mechanic lays each tool in its place. The certified mail receipts, Lyle Truitt's signature on the return cards, the published notices, the record of the expired redemption period. "You're welcome to file," Cobb said mildly. "But I think you should know my client holds a perfect deed, and your client was properly notified 3 times and signed for it twice. A judge will take about 15 minutes to dismiss your claim, and when he does, you'll be paying the costs." Lyle Truitt couldn't stand it. "This is my family's property. That old man owed us. This place is worth millions now, and it's in the hands of some homeless girl who bought it for $10. It's not right." Della walked to the shelf. She took down the carried ledger, set it on the bench, opened it to the back pages full of the word forgive. "Mr. Truitt, your uncle didn't owe you anything. He spent his whole life paying off debts he never owed in the first place. He died alone at this place. You didn't come to the funeral. Now you come because it's worth money. That's exactly what he was afraid of. I know because he wrote your name in a letter." The room went quiet. Outside, the wind moaned through the canopy. Lyle Truitt looked at the ledger, then looked away. For a moment, Della saw on his face not anger, but something small and ashamed, the shame of a man realizing he had been wrong about the worth of a thing his whole life. Vance stood, snapped his case shut. "We withdraw." They left. And this time the cloud of dust behind the black truck never came back. That summer, the state cleanup crew finally came. They dug up the old underground tanks, treated the soil, filled it back in. The thing everyone had been terrified of for 20 years, the $100,000 burden, turned out to be nothing more than a form. The right person, willing to file the right piece of paper. That was all it took. Manny Ortega helped Della swap the 2 rusted pumps for a single refurbished one from a closed station in Tucumcari. One August morning, for the first time in 2 decades, a car pulled into the Comanche Wells station and filled its tank. Della stood under the canopy in the shade that smelled of gasoline and dust, and she felt something she had never felt in all her life. She understood for the first time what the word home actually meant. She couldn't sell fuel yet, not full-time, but she hung a hand-painted sign by the road. Repairs. The first to pull in was a feed hauler with a hot engine. Della fixed him in 40 minutes. When he reached for his wallet, she looked up at the line on the wall. Then, at the carried ledger on the shelf, she took only the cost of the part. The second was a young mother with 2 kids and a flat tire. On her way to Albuquerque, Della patched the tire, checked the other 3, topped off the coolant, took nothing. She took the new ledger she had just bought, opened to the first page, and wrote in her own hand, "Young mother, 2 kids, tire, coolant, forgive. They have a long way to go." She had started Ace's ledger again. She called it the second carried book. She wrote the names of everyone she fixed, for free. A young soldier on his way home on leave. Broke. Engine overheating. Della fixed it. Filled the tank. Took nothing. Wrote. Filled his tank to get him home to Clovis. God keep him. A migrant family with a truck loaded high and a tire blown out in 100-degree heat. Della patched it, gave the kids ice water, checked the whole vehicle. Wrote, "This family has a long way to go. Forgive." The glass jar on the bench, marked Traveler's Fund, never ran empty. People dropped in loose change. A 5, sometimes a 20. A long-haul trucker came in one night with an alternator that had died at midnight. Della fixed it. Took nothing. He came back the next week and pushed $50 into the jar. "There was a man at this station once who did that for my dad," he said. "I don't remember his name, but I remember him." Della said nothing. She just pointed up at the red line on the wall. The trucker nodded like he understood. One September afternoon, close to 2 years from the day her suitcase was set on the step, Della sat on an old metal chair outside the station door and watched the sun go down over the desert. The sky went from gold to rose to deep violet. The wind off the far hills carried dust and juniper and that dry, clean smell she now knew by heart. Behind her, the station glowed warm with light, her grandfather's knife in her pocket, Ace's St. Christopher medal hanging by the door, catching the last light. The second carried book open on her lap, 20 pages already filled. She was 18 years old, suitcase on the front step. No goodbye, no explanation, just a door that closed and never opened again. But that's not the end of the story. It's the beginning. Della Mercer spent $10 on an abandoned gas station in the middle of the New Mexico desert. And what she found there wasn't just a building. It was a home, a community, a reason to get up in the morning. And here's the thing, some debts aren't about money. They're promises, passed from one hand to the next. From a nameless mechanic in a snowstorm in 1949, to a man named Asa Truitt who never forgot him, to a 19-year-old girl who opened a safe and found a letter written for her before she was born. That debt was never paid off. It was only passed on. And that's the whole point. A good tool finds the hand that needs it. Della Mercer found her hand in a rusted gas station at a forgotten crossroads. And the line on the wall, the one that says no one gets left on the side of the road, it'll outlast every single person who ever painted it. So here's the question for you. What has someone you never met left behind for you? Winter came down on Comanche Wells like a dropped gate. Snow in November, rare for the high desert, a foot of it piling against the station walls. The old well pump froze solid. Della had to haul water from Santa Rosa in 5-gallon jugs, driving the Ford Ranger on roads turned to ice, the heater barely working, her breath smoking in the cab. The station's propane tank ran low in December. The delivery truck couldn't make it up the unplowed road. Della slept in the repair bay those nights, wrapped in a sleeping bag on a cot she'd bought at a thrift store, the kerosene heater hissing low and blue, her grandfather's knife on the floor beside her. She learned to bank the fire, to stretch a tank of propane 3 extra days, to wear a hat indoors and keep her core warm. Then, one night, a blizzard howled down from the north. Wind so strong, it shook the rolling steel door in its tracks. Della lay awake, listening to the metal groan, thinking about the tin roof she and Manny had put on, hoping the storm screws held. She got up, pulled on her coat, went out into the white chaos with a flashlight to check the canopy. The old concrete pillars stood solid. The line on the wall was buried under a drift, but she knew it was still there. She went back inside, shivering, and for the first time in months, she let herself feel afraid. Not of the storm, of losing this place, of being put out again. Morning came clear and blinding white. The desert transformed, every juniper bush wearing a hood of snow, the sky so blue it hurt. The canopy held. The station stood. Della dug the door out, started the kerosene heater, made coffee on a camp stove. Then she sat in the office with the ledger open, reading Ace's entries from winters past. January 1987 snowed in 3 days. Mrs. Pacheco's son came through on a tractor to check on me, brought tamales. Some debts are paid in tamales. Della laughed out loud, the first laugh she'd heard from herself in weeks. By late February, the snow melted. The desert turned briefly green, and the first customer of spring was a man in a broken-down sedan with a cracked radiator, no money, and 2 children in the back seat. Della fixed the radiator with a patch and epoxy she'd been saving for emergencies, sent him on his way with a full tank of gas from her own reserve. Then she wrote in the ledger, "Man with 2 kids, radiator, gas, forgive. Spring is coming." The letter came in March. Della was standing at the workbench when she opened it. She read it once, then she read it again. Then she sat down. The Guadalupe County Assessor's Office had reassessed the station property. The old value, $2,500. The price of abandoned land with a condemned building was gone. The new value, $187,000. The value of a functioning business at a future highway interchange. The new annual property tax, $4,680. Della did the math on a scrap of paper. The traveler's fund jar had $340. Her personal savings held $600. The station brought in maybe $200 a month in repairs and gas sales. She could not pay $4,680. She sat in the office with the tax notice in her hand, and the old feeling crept back. The feeling that the world would tear it all away. She called Marion Cobb. Cobb listened. Then she said something Della didn't expect. "They can't assess it at market value if you're running it as a charitable operation. You're not a gas station, Della. You're a roadside mission. If you formally register as a non-profit, with the ledger as your charter, the tax code treats you different. You might not owe a dime." Della didn't know what a non-profit was. She knew how to change a water pump. She knew how to listen to an engine and know where it hurt. She did not know how to file for tax exemption. But she learned. Cobb walked her through the paperwork. Manny's wife Rosa, who used to do bookkeeping for a church in Las Vegas, drove out to help. Della spent 3 weeks filling out forms, copying the ledger by hand, writing a mission statement in her own careful letters, to ensure that no traveler on Highway 104 is left on the side of the road. The application went in, and then it waited. For 6 months, Della worked the station. She kept the jar full. She fixed cars. She wrote "forgive" in the ledger. And every month, she looked at the tax notice pinned to the wall and wondered if this was the month she lost everything. The waiting was worse than the blizzard. The blizzard had been one night. This was a season of not knowing. September came, and with it, a thick envelope from the Internal Revenue Service. Della opened it, standing at the workbench, her hands shaking so bad she nearly tore the paper. She expected a denial. She expected the world to take it all away again. Instead, she found a letter granting her 501c3 tax-exempt status, retroactive to the date of her application. The tax bill for the previous year was voided. The station was now legally recognized as a charitable organization. Della read the letter 3 times, each time the same words, each time still real. Then she walked out to the canopy, stood under the red line, and cried. The second time she had cried since the night in the Lubbock parking lot, 2 years and a lifetime ago. That same week, a second letter arrived. handwritten, postmarked from a small town in Oklahoma. Della opened it and found a note from a woman named Irene Sandoval. "I was going through my mother's things after she passed," the letter read, "and found an old receipt from Truett Station dated 1978. The receipt says, transmission work, $320 paid in full. But my mother always told me a different story," she said. "Asa Truett fixed our truck for free the winter my father lost his job, and that she never forgot it. She kept that receipt because she wanted to remember the man who helped us. I looked up the station online and found your story. I don't know who you are, but I know you're carrying on what he started. Enclosed is $100 for your traveler's fund. Keep the line on the wall." Della added the money to the jar. Then she opened the ledger and wrote Irene Sandoval's name under a new heading she made herself, "Gifts from Those Who Remember." And then she looked up Asa's old entry. Sandoval transmission, $320. Forgive they lost a cow that winter. 46 years later, a debt forgiven by a dead man came back as a gift from a woman who never knew him, to a girl who never knew either of them. The chain held. That night, Della sat outside the station in the cooling dark. The tax-exempt letter was in her pocket. Irene Sandoval's envelope sat on the bench beside her. She counted the stars coming out over the desert more than she ever saw in Amarillo. She thought about the line on the wall, the ledger, the knife in her pocket, the medal by the door. She thought about her mother, somewhere, and felt nothing. Not anger, not sadness. Just the quiet knowledge that she had been given a family she never expected, made of dead mechanics and old welders and women who remembered receipts from 1978. She went inside, lit the kerosene lamp, opened the new ledger to a fresh page, and wrote at the top, "Year 3. The station is still running. The line is still there. No one has been left on the side of the road on my watch. I aim to keep it that way." She was 18 years old and put out of her own home. She had $187.40 to her name, and she spent 10 of them on an abandoned gas station in the middle of the New Mexico desert. A good tool finds the hand that needs it. Her grandfather said that when he gave her the folding knife at 12, she thought he meant a socket, a wrench, the knife itself, something you hold in your hand and use on something else. She knows now he meant her. She was the tool. The station was the hand that needed her. Or maybe it was the other way around. Maybe a good tool and a good hand find each other when the time is right. Della Mercer stands at the repair bay door on a warm May morning. 3 years to the day from the suitcase on the step in Amarillo. The station is painted, the roof is sound, the line on the wall is bright red, traced fresh over the faded coral she found that first afternoon. A new sign hangs over the door. Truett Station, no one gets left on the side of the road. Inside, the traveler's fund jar is full. The second carried book has 80 pages filled with names and amounts, and the word forgive written in her own hand. A calendar on the wall shows May of this year, and she plans to turn it to June when the time comes. A car pulls up. A young woman, maybe 19 or 20, with a toddler in the passenger seat and a worried look you can see from 20 feet away. Her engine is making a noise she can't describe. She has $12 and needs to get to Albuquerque. Della listens to the engine, finds a loose belt, tightens it, checks the oil, tops off the coolant, sends her on her way with a full tank. The young woman starts to cry, tries to offer the $12. Della shakes her head, points up at the line on the wall. No one gets left on the side of the road. That's the rule here. You're not the first. You won't be the last. Go on. Somebody's waiting for you in Albuquerque. Della watches the car disappear down Highway 104. Dust settles over the asphalt. She walks back to the workbench, opens the ledger, and writes, "Young woman, toddler, belt and gas, forgive." She had a long way to go, and someone waiting at the end. She closes the ledger, runs her thumb over the worn leather, sets it on the shelf beside Asa's original. 2 books, 2 lifetimes, 1 line on the wall that will outlast them both. Some debts are not debts of money. They are promises passed from one hand to the next, from a snowstorm in 1949 to a dusty floor safe to a 19-year-old girl watching the sun go down over the desert. A debt that is never paid off, only passed on. A good tool finds the hand that needs it, and Della Mercer found hers. If this story moved you, subscribe to the channel and share it with someone who needs to hear it. And tell us in the comments, what has someone you never met left behind for you? We'd love to hear your story. We'll see you in the next one.